I'm now going to welcome up Michael. Can we give Michael a round of applause? We're so blessed to have him this morning. Michael, you have been to Mosaic before, but let's just get to know you a little bit. Can you tell us who are you and what do you do?
Great. So my name is Michael. I come from. Am I on? Is it on?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, am I on now? Yeah, great. I come from a little village that you won't have heard of outside a city that you will have done, Leicester. It's a couple of hours away. So what was the question? Where am I from? Was that the only question?
And what do you do?
What do I do? Yeah. So I give talks, actually, a lot of the time. I give talks about the Christian faith and how the Christian faith engages with lots of the big questions of life that we might have, lots of the big issues that we face in life. And so I do that mostly in a university context. So I feel really at home this morning because this is the kind of place where I normally speak. In universities, at the invitation often of Christian students, both here in the UK, but also in other parts of Europe as well.
Thank you. This could be a question that divides the room. You might be about to become public enemy number one. Yeah. Were you with or without air conditioning this week?
I was without it, actually. Yeah. Well,
we're probably more likely to listen to you that. I'm just going to pray for Michael before he speaks. Yeah, God, I thank you for bringing Michael here, and thank you for all that he's doing to share you with other people. And I just pray, God, that that you would just fill him with your peace and confidence this morning as we hear from him. Amen.
Probably better to use this one, I think, yeah? Great. Well, it's good to be with you. Now, having said that I didn't have air conditioning this week, I also probably feel I should admit I was also on holiday. While you were baking in the heat, I was in Cornwall. And in Cornwall, the weather was like 25 degrees max. It was perfect. So now you can all feel really, really jealous. It was a good place to be in a heat wave. All those people who spend loads of money flying away, like, why do you do it? Last week it was great. Anyway, but it's good to be home and it's good to be here. And great to be with you again. I was here about almost exactly 6 months ago for one of your Christmas services. So it's a real joy to be back with you. And we're thinking today about this question. I've been asked to speak on this question or this issue of how can we find peace in a polarized world. I guess there's all sorts of things that could polarize our opinions today on different things. I could talk about Marmite, couldn't I? Yeah, do you love it? Do you hate it? Okay, apparently you have to choose, okay? You don't just moderately like Marmite. You love it or you hate it. And actually, we kind of live in a world now where we basically are given that kind of choice, not just over, what to put on your toast, but over everything, right? We have such strong opinions on everything, whether it was Brexit, whether it's immigration, whether it's which political party you'll vote for at the next election. We have such strong opinions. We live in an increasingly polarized world. We see that particularly in the opinion polls when it comes to politics, where people are being driven further apart, both to the left and to the right, on all sorts of issues. We are so polarized. And I guess one of the questions we might ask is, why is that the case? Why do we live in a world where we are so polarized over so many different issues? And I guess part of the answer that has been suggested is the thing that's sitting in your pocket, your mobile phone. We've become increasingly aware, haven't we, that the internet, our phones, and particularly social media, they can drive us into silos, into echo chambers, where we basically hang out online with people who agree with us. And once you're connected with the entire world, it's normally quite easy to find people who agree with you, right? You don't just have to choose from the people in your community. You've got the whole world to choose from. And there's probably someone out there that has the same opinions on you on almost everything. And so one of the things people have recognized about social media is it drives us into these echo chambers where we live in a world where everyone agrees with us, where everyone reflects back to us our own ideas, and we are insulated and buffered from anyone who might have a different view. Or at least if we do, we quickly tell them that they're wrong. A couple of elections ago, I was on Twitter, as it was back then, and I was struck by someone's comment. They said, how did the particular party in their area get into power, they said, I don't know anyone who voted for that party. Oh, what's the problem, isn't it? Like, clearly lots of people did vote for them because they got in. But your experience of life is so curated that you've not encountered any of these people. So that's the kind of world we live in. But is there a deeper issue going on? Is it too simplistic just to say, it's all the fault of social media? And I think there is. A book that came out a few years ago by Jonathan Haidt, an American psychologist, is a fascinating insight into the kind of culture or cultural moment we're in. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And although it's written in the American context, I think it applies quite broadly across the whole Western world. Subtitle, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And in the book, he looks at three, he calls them untruths, three untruths that we have come to believe quite widely in Western society, which actually have set us up for failure. And one of those untruths really spoke to me and struck me, and it was this. He talks about the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. Now, don't mishear what he's saying. He's not saying that there is no such thing as good or evil. He agrees with that. Okay, and that's a big problem, actually, if we start thinking that there is no such thing as good or evil. But he's saying the temptation, the untruth that we're led to believe is this, that there are some people in the world, and we can call them the good people. And evidently, most of us will put ourselves in that category, right? No one normally willingly puts himself in the bad category. Like, I don't think Hitler would have even done that, right? Whatever reason, we all put ourselves in the good category. And then there are other people in the world, and they are the evil people. They are the problem with the world. They are the reason why the world's in such a mess. And so we divide the world into good people and evil people. And we think if only people were just a bit more like me, with my ideas and my views, then the world would be a better place. Have you ever been tempted? Amen. That wasn't the moment to say amen, okay? Have you ever been tempted to think that way? Well, evidently someone has. Now, he says, actually, is this a problem? Is this a problem? And he quotes in the book a thinker and an author who had lived about 50 years before, a guy called Alexander Solzhenitsyn, one of the authors with the best beards in history. There he is. And Solzhenitsyn wrote a book called The Gulag Archipelago. And in that book, he reflected on his experiences in the Soviet Gulag. That was the Soviet version of the concentration camp. And it's a horrific and traumatizing read as he recounts the torture, the injustice, and the suffering that he faced. Now, I found it particularly moving because my great-granddad on my father's side was someone, here's a statue of him in Estonia, the town that he was the lifelong mayor of in Estonia. He and his wife were both taken to the Soviet Gulag, and both of them died in Siberia just during the Second World War. So reading this account felt quite personal to my own family history. But Alexander Solzhenitsyn in this book recounts this horrific evil. And if there was anyone who could have quite easily said, the problem of the world are those people, it would have been him, right? He could have easily said, the problem of the world is this Soviet system. If we could just get rid of the Soviets, this system, the world would be a better place. It would have been really easy for him to say that. But this is what he said. He said, if only it was so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But get this, he says, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who's willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? It would have been so easy, wouldn't it, for Solzhenitsyn to say, the problem of the world are those people who are oppressing and torturing me. And he talks about how he was tempted to do that, but he said, actually, the line dividing good and evil doesn't go through political regimes, down national boundaries, but he says it goes down every human heart. In other words, all of us are capable of both. It's not that the world is divided into people who are totally good and people who are totally evil. We're all a mixture of both. Now, where did Solzhenitsyn get that idea from? Well, actually, Solzhenitsyn was a Christian believer. And he got that idea from someone who had lived 2,000 years before, from Jesus Christ. From Jesus, who said that the problems of our world don't just come from out there, but they come from in here. And I want us to look at a story that Jesus told that illustrates this and the problems that we face. It's found in Luke's Gospel. If you've got a Bible, you can turn to it, but it'll be on the screen as well, and you can follow along. Often Jesus taught in stories that would make a point, and we'll see the point that Jesus is making in a minute. But this is in Luke's account of Jesus' life, Luke chapter 18. And we read this: "To some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable, this story. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get.' But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.' I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." It's one of Jesus' stories, as I said, often called the Pharisee and the tax collector for obvious reasons. Now, one of the problems we have when we come to this story is that 2,000 years on, we kind of know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, right? And the good guy isn't the Pharisee. We don't use Pharisee in a complimentary sense, do we, in contemporary society? You're such a lovely Pharisee. No one's ever said that. Don't be so pharisaical. That's the kind of thing we say. We know that Pharisees are the bad guys. Tax collectors, well, okay, they're not necessarily the good guys. we don't admire tax collectors, but we don't hate them either, do we? They're just doing a job. Someone has to, and we might resent it, but, they're not that bad. Not as bad as traffic wardens. Maybe they are. I don't know. But you get the point, right? So we read the story, and we kind of know who should be the good guy, or at least the not bad guy, and who the really bad guy is. If you were listening to Jesus, you would not be thinking in those categories, okay? Because if you were listening to Jesus, the Pharisees in that society were those who were respected, those who were admired, those who seemed to be on the right side of history, okay? These are the people who had got it right. You didn't despise them. Being a Pharisee wasn't a derogatory term. It was a term of respect and admiration. And being a tax collector, well, being a tax collector in that culture was a whole lot worse than perhaps being one in this. Because often associated with tax collecting would have been probably some snide taking of extra money on the side for yourself, and the fact that you had colluded with the occupying forces, the Roman powers, against your own people to get yourself rich. So there was no question to the people listening to Jesus tell this story about who should have been the good guy, who should have been the bad guy. They could have easily drawn that line, couldn't they? And yet, Jesus kind of turns things on its head, doesn't he? Look at this Pharisee, and what does he do? Well, he's praying, he's giving, he's on the surface such an admirable person, and yet what is he doing? Well, you can see quite easily what he's doing. Firstly, he's virtue signaling, isn't he? He's making it clear that he's praying for a start, which is what Jesus said elsewhere you probably shouldn't do. Don't do your prayer so you could be seen to be doing a prayer. But also, he reminds God, and perhaps anyone else that was listening at the time, of all the things that he's done. He fasts. He gives his money and so on. Look at me. Look at what I'm doing. And not only does he virtue signal, but you notice also he calls out and publicly shames a whole load of other people. So he talks about the tax collector, the robbers, the evildoers. It's very easy, isn't it, to think of someone in life who's worse than you to make yourself feel better. To play the comparison game. I'm not as bad as them. And actually, I would say that is a big temptation, particularly on social media, isn't it? If I just really loudly call out the injustices of other people, the racism or whatever of other people, then maybe it will deflect the attention from me. Because I will look so good as I condemn others. Like, this isn't a new thing, is it? People have been doing this for 2,000 years. So the Pharisee, by comparison, what about the tax collector? Well, he doesn't even look up to heaven, we're told. Doesn't even come to the center of the temple. But he simply prays one of the most simple prayers: God, have mercy on me, a sinner. In other words, he comes clean. Doesn't pretend to be what he's not. Doesn't try to compare himself to others. He just says, I've got it wrong. And that's one of the hardest things in the world to do, isn't it? I mean, in one sense, it's the simplest thing. Like, it's the thing we teach children to do, like, from the moment they learn to talk. Say sorry. And yet, how hard is it to actually say sorry? How hard is it to actually admit our own failings? It's really, really hard. I don't know if you recognize this guy. Martin Lewis. Apparently he's the most trusted guy in Britain. I don't know what that says about Britain, but says that he's probably quite trustworthy. He did a poll on X a few years ago, and he basically was asking people whether they thought, well, he did two actually. Firstly, whether people thought that other people were generally decent and honest. And then secondly, whether they thought that they were generally decent and honest. And this is what he then concluded by the poll. He said, so far, in this poll, 95% of people believe that they are decent and generally honest. Yet only 16% of people in my earlier poll believe that over 90% of other people are. So either we're overinflating our own goodness or underappreciating it in others. Isn't that fascinating? Basically, we just like to think that we're better than statistics would suggest that we are. Another book that highlighted this was written by the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize for economics, where basically he looked at the biases in our minds that allow us to make, well, faulty decisions in economics, but not just in economics. You could extrapolate it to other decisions in life. And in doing so, he basically looks at lots of psychological experiments. I don't know anyone's studying psychology, but some of the psychological experiments are quite fun, aren't they? Because you basically set people up to do a thing, but the thing that you're really doing is never the thing that you tell them you're doing. Anyway, I won't go into all the detail, but he looks at this particular psychological experiments where basically it showed that people were just not very good at helping when help was needed. And then he did a study where he told people the results of this survey, and then he asked people the question, do you think you would have helped in that situation? And you can guess what happened, right? A far higher proportion of people said that they would help than the evidence suggested actually happened. And he concludes this. He says, changing one's mind about human nature is hard work. Changing one's mind for the worse about oneself is even harder. See, in one sense, it's really simple, isn't it, to say what the tax collector did. God have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. But actually, everything shouts at us not to do that. It's really hard. But can I suggest, actually, I think it's particularly hard, maybe in this particular cultural moment that we're in. Because we live at a time when I would suggest there isn't a great deal of forgiveness. Douglas Murray is a conservative commentator, perhaps something of a controversial figure, but I think he was onto something when he said this: we have created a world in which forgiveness has become almost impossible. We do seem to live in a world where actions have consequences that we could never have imagined, where guilt and shame are more at hand than ever, and where we have no means whatsoever of redemption. We don't know who could offer it. In other words, he says, we live in a world that is very quick at calling out the failings of people, but seemingly very slow to ever offer forgiveness. In fact, I was reading another book recently, and it was saying, you know, online, the first rule of online is never apologize. Do you know why? He says, because apologies used to be taken as a means by which we would receive forgiveness. Now apologies are just seen as an admission of guilt, and they lead to further condemnation. In other words, we go through life never apologizing because we live in a society that will never forgive. And if we live in a society like that, wouldn't it be better to be a Pharisee? be safer, wouldn't it? It'd be much safer to go around calling out the actions of others, because it might just deflect the attention from the failings in our own lives. Now, why do we live in a society that struggles to forgive? I want to suggest perhaps part of the answer to that is that we've misunderstood what forgiveness actually is. And we've conflated forgiveness with tolerance. You know, we often talk about we live in a tolerant society, and I don't think that's a bad thing by any means. But there is a world of difference between tolerance and forgiveness. The difference actually came home to me in a rather amusing and embarrassing way a few years ago, but let me tell you the story. I used to work for a church in the south of England, in Bournemouth. And a number of years ago, I preached kind of at the morning service, and an old lady came up to me after the service, and she said, "Michael, I don't think your shirts are very well ironed." And I said to her, well, actually, that's because they're not ironed. And she said, well, I would like to do your ironing for you. And I said, oh, it's very kind of you, but I'm fine. Anyway, the following week, she came up to me and she said, Michael, I really would like to do your ironing for you. I said, look, I'm fine. And so this went on for a few weeks. And eventually, I thought the only way I could get her off my case was to actually allow her to do my ironing. Now, someone did suggest recently that I could have just done my own, but it didn't occur to me at the time. So we came up with this arrangement where I would do my washing, and then I would drive across town, give her my washed but unironed clothes. I would drive home, and then a couple of days later, I would drive across town and pick up my ironed clothes and drive home. I was spending about an hour and a half of my week just driving across town. I mean, it would have been quicker just to do the ironing. But anyway, she was happy. Everyone else was happy. I had ironed clothes. This went on for a few months until one particular week I was really busy. So although I had dropped off my clothes, I didn't have time to go and pick them up. A couple of days later, she phones me up and she says, like, are you going to come and pick your clothes up? And I'm like, no, I'm just kind of busy. And she says, well, don't worry, I could leave them at the church office. So I said, oh, that's great. That'd be really helpful. So she leaves them at the church office. The next day, I'm thinking, like, actually probably need to get my clothes now. So I drive into the church office and I look for my clothes. And I can't find them. So I go downstairs and I find the secretary. And I said to the secretary, have you seen my clothes? And she says, why would I have seen your clothes? I said, oh. So I had to explain about this arrangement I had with this lady, Barbara. And she found this very amusing, like you do. But she said, well, I haven't seen your clothes. So I phone up Barbara and I said, Barbara, what did you do with my clothes? And she said, well, I left them with Muriel. Now, you don't know who Muriel was, but I instantly got worried because Muriel was the lady who ran the outreach to the homeless that had met the previous day. So I go downstairs and I find Muriel and I said, Muriel, Barbara gave me my my clothes. Have you got them? And there was this like really horrible penny dropping metaphorical moment when she realized what had happened. She said, oh dear, you better come and have a look. And we discovered quite quickly that basically all of my clothes had been taken by the homeless. Like there was nothing, well actually, there was two things left. There were my pajamas and a t-shirt that was obviously so bad that even the homeless didn't want it. Like no one else wanted it. So there I am, like for weeks after, I was walking around town, bumping into people wearing my clothes. And I kind of wanted to ask for them back, but the optics weren't going to be great. So anyway, I was really upset at this point. So I'm like, why did you give away my clothes? And she said, well, it's not my fault. It's Barbara's fault. She knows I run the outreach to the homeless. She shouldn't have given me your clothes. So I phoned up Barbara and I said, Barbara, why did you give Muriel my clothes? And she said, well, it's not my fault. It's Muriel's fault. I told her they were your clothes. So Muriel blamed Barbara and Barbara blamed Muriel. And this went on. And eventually, Barbara's on the phone and she says, well, Michael, I'm sorry. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is the point where I say, don't worry about it, it's fine. But I couldn't. I was so upset. Like literally no clothes left. And I just couldn't say, it's okay. So I was thinking, well, what should I say? I just couldn't think of anything to say in this particular moment. So I did the only thing that I felt I could do at that moment, so I put the phone down. But then I felt really bad. I was like, oh, I should have said something. So anyway, I phoned up my friend Steve, and I said to Steve, like, what had happened, and he found it very funny like you do. And eventually I'm like, well, Steve, Barbara said that she was sorry. I felt I should say it was okay, but I couldn't say it was okay because it wasn't okay. What should I have said? I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, if you were willing, you should have said, I forgive you. And suddenly it dawned on me the difference between forgiveness and tolerance. Tolerance is when you say to someone, it's okay, doesn't matter. And you can do that, can't you? And at the end of the day, giving away someone's clothes isn't the biggest deal in the world. But forgiveness is not saying it's okay. Forgiveness is actually saying it's not okay, but I'm not going to make you pay. And that's so important to remember because we live in a society that thinks forgiveness is tolerance and thinks that all we need to do is say it doesn't matter. And yet there are so many things in our world that do matter, don't they? Racism does matter. Injustice does matter. And we can't just look at our unjust world and say it doesn't matter. That would be wrong. But forgiveness is not saying it's okay. In fact, it's the opposite, isn't it? Forgiveness is saying it's not okay. But I'm not going to make you pay. And that's actually at the heart of what the whole Christian story is about. See, who was it who went home justified in that story? It was the tax collector. What does justified mean? It just means forgiven. It means that God has forgiven this man who's come clean about his failings. You see, when God looks at the world, he doesn't say, it's okay, because it's not, is it? When God looked at this man's life, he didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. He had failed. He was right in his verdict on himself. And if we're really honest, if God was to look at us, there's lots in our lives, isn't there, that's not okay. God doesn't say it's okay, but he is willing to forgive, to not make us pay. Because at the heart of the Christian story is a God who is willing to come to take what we deserve. That he would take the payment, that he would carry the can, that he would literally be publicly shamed on a cross. And as he died in naked agony, Jesus was taking upon himself the guilt and the shame of our world, of you, of me. Not so that he could tolerate us, but so that he could forgive us. God doesn't want to say it's okay, but he doesn't want to make us pay. He was willing to pay so that we could be forgiven. And can I suggest, when you know there is a God who sees everything and is willing to do that, maybe it makes it just a little bit easier to do what the tax collector did, to come clean. When you know there's a God who isn't waiting to judge, to condemn, to reject you, but a God who is longing to welcome, invite, and forgive you, doesn't it make it just a little bit easier to say, I've got it wrong? Because he's not waiting to condemn us, but to forgive. I don't know, maybe there's people here this morning and maybe the big fear you've had in life is, yeah, you know you've got it wrong, but you'd never want to admit it. Admit it to others because they would judge you, and if there is a God, well, I certainly wouldn't admit it to him. But the message this morning is that there is a God who already knows it all anyway, but is ready to forgive. Makes it a bit easier, doesn't it? Now, how does this all relate to our question? How do we find peace in a polarized world? I think it relates in this way as we come to a close. It is those who've experienced the forgiveness of God who are best equipped, I would suggest, to offer that forgiveness to others. How do we build a culture, not of condemnation, but of forgiveness? It starts by experiencing forgiveness. And history shows us what happens when people do. My wife and I love going to South Africa, got many friends there. If ever there was a country after apartheid that could have been torn apart by civil war, it was South Africa. The horrific evils and injustices that were done in that country. And yet, why didn't it? Partly because of a man called Nelson Mandela, who said, rather than seeking retribution, we should seek reconciliation. Who inspired Mandela in that way? Well, he was largely inspired, I would suggest, by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was inspired by Jesus. How was someone able to seek not revenge and retribution, but reconciliation? Because they'd understood something of the reconciliation of God. Or to take an individual story, some of you might have read her books. Corrie ten Boom was an amazing lady who, along with her father and sister in the Second World War, sheltered Jews in her house to protect them from being taken away to the German Nazi concentration camps. And as she did that, she and her sister and father were eventually found out, captured and taken to those very same concentration camps where her father and then her sister both died. She survived and she lived to tell the story of her experiences there. But one particular story stands out about when she met one of the men from that concentration camp, one of the guards. Let me read it to you. She says, "It was a church service in Munich that I saw him, the former SS man who had stood guard in the shower door in the processing centre at Ravensbrück. He was the first of our actual jailers that I had seen since that time. And suddenly it was all there. The room full of mocking men, the heaps of clothing, Betsy's pain-blanched face. He came up to me as the church was emptying, beaming and bowing. 'How grateful I am for your message, Fräulein,' he said. 'To think that, as you say, he's washed my sins away.' His hand was thrust out to shake mine, and I, who had preached so often about the need to forgive, kept my hand at my sides. Even as the very angry, vengeful thoughts boiled through me, I saw the sin of them. Jesus Christ had died for this man. Was I going to ask for more? Lord Jesus, I prayed, forgive me and help me to forgive him. I tried to smile. I struggled to raise my hand, but I couldn't. I felt nothing, not the slightest spark of warmth or charity. And so again, I breathed a silent prayer. Jesus, I cannot forgive him. Give me your forgiveness. As I took his hand, the most incredible thing happened. From my shoulder, along my arm, and through my hand, a current seemed to pass from me to him, while into the heart sprang a love for this stranger that almost overwhelmed me." She concludes this way. "And so I discovered that it is not in our forgiveness any more than our goodness that the world's healing hinges, but on his. When he tells us to love our enemies, he gives us, along with the command, the love itself." What could heal a broken world? Forgiveness. And what would equip us to be able to forgive? Experiencing it ourselves. Because to some degree we all need it, don't we? I don't know what you make of all this as we wrap up. Maybe you're here and you're perhaps very skeptical about what you've heard this morning. Maybe you've got all sorts of questions about it. Maybe you're not at all convinced. If that's you this morning, I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to come on a Sunday morning, to engage in what might be kind of unusual for you, and to listen to what I've had to say. We really appreciate that. But I also just want to say, if you're tempted to just reject this, at least make sure you know what you're rejecting. I'd really encourage you, why not take one of these accounts of Jesus' life, the one that we read from this morning, maybe Luke, and just read it. Take you about 2 or 3 hours to do that. Because the heart of the Christian faith is a person. It's Jesus. Have you really taken the time to look into who he was and is? Do you know what you're rejecting? At least do that. And at least at the end of that, you might be a better informed skeptic than you are right now, okay? That's your challenge. Maybe you're here this morning and maybe you've got all sorts of questions. Maybe, again, this is the kind of first time you thought about this and you want to look into this more. Well, we'll tell you again at the end about some of the steps you might want to take to just get into the Bible more, to ask your questions and to explore this further. But actually, we also want to say this morning there is an invitation. There is an invitation not just to explore intellectually about a theory called Christianity, but there is an invitation this morning to experience the forgiveness and the love of God right now. This God stands ready to welcome each one of us. And the only thing that becomes a barrier between us and him is our refusal to accept that we need it. If this morning we'll stop doing that, if this morning we're willing to say to this God, yeah, I have got it wrong, and I need your forgiveness, this God stands welcome and forgive us. And he's also got a community. It's called the church. It stands welcome and ready to welcome us too. That's one of the reasons why I love church. Because a community that is built on forgiveness hopefully should be good at showing it. So maybe this morning, if you're here and you've never done that, I just want to encourage you this morning to do it. I'm going to finish with a prayer in a moment. And maybe you just want to echo this prayer in your heart as a way of saying to God that that's what you want to do. It uses 3 of the most simple words we learn when we're kids. Sorry, thank you, and please. Saying to God, sorry for the way that we've hurt others, damaged his world, pushed him out of our lives so often. Saying to God, thank you, that that's not the way he's responded to us. He could have done, but he stands ready to welcome us. And through Jesus can forgive us. He's not going to make us pay. And then God, please come into my heart. Please forgive me. Please give me your love. And then please help me with your love in my life to love others in the way that you've loved me. He'll give you that resource that we could never have on our own. So let's just have a moment of quiet. Maybe a chance just to reflect. Is that something that we've ever done? And if not, is that something we would like to do or know that we need to do today? And if you'd like to do that, then maybe you just want to echo these words in your heart. God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the way that I've hurt others. I'm sorry for the way I've hurt you. I'm sorry for the way that in so many ways I'm not the person I should be. God, thank you that you stand ready not to condemn but to forgive. Thank you that because of Jesus, you don't make me pay because you paid for me. Please, God, will you come into my heart and life? Please forgive me. And please, as you give me your forgiveness and your love, empower me to offer that to others. Thank you for hearing this prayer. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We're going to continue in worship in a moment. But just saying, if you did pray that this morning, I'd love to encourage you to tell someone what you've done. Maybe the person who invited you, someone that you know, or come and speak to me, Anna, anyone that you've seen up the front. Do tell someone what you've done. And also, if you've got questions, I'm aware that a talk like this maybe raises all sorts of questions. Again, please don't go home without asking those questions. I'd be really happy to chat through any questions that you've got off the back of that afterwards as well. We're going to continue in worship now.